Hello and welcome everyone, my Commander deck tech on the partner pairing of Tevesh Szat, Doom of Fools, and Rograkh, son of Rograkh. This is a competitive build of Tevesh Szat and Rograkh that's meant to be played in a EDH meta. The deck's main goal is to combo off incredibly fast. We take advantage of Tevesh Szat's ability to draw cards to allow the deck to run more effectively, while also gaining value from sacrificing creatures. So why should you use Tevesh Szat and Rograkh? Okay, first things first, Tevesh Szat is obviously the main commander in the deck. Rograkh is only used as sacrifice fodder, and he gives us access to a second color. So the deck is mostly going to be based on Tevesh Szat. Tevesh Szat is a planeswalker, so let's go over each of his abilities. His +2 creates two 0/1 Thrall tokens. These may just be 0/1s, but they provide us with a lot of utility in the deck. Their main functionality is as great sacrifice fodder for Tevesh Szat's second ability, and the many other sacrifice themed cards in the deck. The 0/1s are also useful as chump blockers to keep Tevesh Szat alive. Getting past two creatures can be annoying for your opponents, especially in CDH where creatures aren't as abundant. His first ability is a +2, which is a nice chunk of loyalty, and gets him to his ultimate at a decent pace. Overall, it's a solid first ability. His second ability is a +1, which reads, you may sacrifice another creature or planeswalker. If you do, draw 2 cards, then draw another card if the sacrificed permanent was a commander. I'm always a huge fan of commanders with card advantage attached to them. Having access to that every game makes your deck run much more efficiently. What's good about this partner pairing is if you're in need of 3 cards instead of just 2, you can play Rograkh for 0 and get the extra card. Although I wouldn't recommend it, since having Rograkh cost 0 is useful for the main combo in the deck. You'll most likely be sacrificing the 0/1s that Tevesh Szat makes to his +1. Now for his ultimate. This thing is absolutely brutal. It could potentially shut down opponents' entire decks if they're heavily reliant on their commander, which is most commander decks. His ultimate snatches all commanders from the battlefield and command zones and puts them under your control. You now have an entire army at your disposal, which you can proceed to sacrifice for value, and it can force your opponents to use removal on their own cards, which is always satisfying. Honestly, his ultimate works better as a countdown that your opponents need to deal with rather than something you'll be able to use, which takes the aggro off your other permanents and your life total. I'm sure Tevesh Szat and his 0/1s are going to be eating most of the attacks just to keep him off his ultimate. Tevesh Szat's cool and all, but how does the deck actually win the game? The deck's main win condition is to cheat Rograkh the Foul-Blooded into play and use his ability to tutor to combo off. Rograkh is basically a 1-card combo, the main drawback being his ridiculous mana cost of 8. 8 mana is a lot, even for casual, but for CDH it's a completely unreasonable amount. However, Rograkh is a creature, so you could cheat him into play from the graveyard using reanimation effects. His other cost of sacrificing a creature is easily paid for in this deck. Both commanders provide great sacrifice fodder for his ability. Paying 2 life shouldn't be much of a cost, but there are cards in the deck to help with their life total if that ever becomes an issue. Here are some of the pros of the deck. Tevesh Szat provides the deck with everything it needs to function, so the deck should run incredibly efficiently. The Rograkh combo can be incredibly quick, especially in this deck since Rograkh can provide you with the initial sacrifice for Rograkh's ability. The Rograkh combo is very versatile, allowing you to combo off in a variety of different ways depending on the board state. Here are some of the cons of the deck. Rakdos is kind of a mediocre color pairing, since you can't deal with enchantments, and you don't have blue in the deck, which immediately puts you at a disadvantage in CEDH. If there are too many creatures on the battlefield and Tevesh Szat gets killed, and you can't play him again, the deck isn't going to function anywhere near as efficiently. Getting him down early and keeping him there is going to really help your chances of winning. 5 mana for a commander is an annoyingly high amount just to play something that's going to make your deck run better rather than win you the game. However, the deck should be able to get to that amount pretty consistently. Rograkh may be a one-card combo, but he needs a combo to tutor into that actually ends the game. The main combo is the Mikaeus the Unhallowed and Triskelion combo. I also put the Mikaeus and Walking Ballista combo in the deck since the deck runs some sacrifice outlets. The deck also runs Aetherflux Reservoir as backup, so with Rograkh on the battlefield you should be able to storm off and kill your opponents. The main Rograkh line is grabbing Buried Alive with the first activation, which puts Mikaeus and Triskelion in the graveyard. With the second activation you get Victimize. You can either sacrifice Rograkh or another creature to Victimize, which puts Mikaeus and Triskelion into play. The overall cost is 6 mana for 2 spells, sacrificing 3 creatures, and paying 4 life to Rograkh activations. There are a few ways around these costs using Rograkh. If you need mana to get to the 6 needed, you can grab Burnt Offering to sacrifice Rograkh, which gets you 8 mana. Just make sure you have a creature to sacrifice to Victimize. You can also grab Rain of Filth if you have enough swamps to sacrifice and are ready to go all in on winning that turn. If you don't have access to any mana to cast the ritual effects, you can grab Lotus Petal or any of the other 0 CMC mana rocks to get the 1 mana needed. This is one of the most important reasons for running Rograkh as a commander. You can continually sacrifice him, and if he doesn't have any commander attacks, you get 1 free sacrifice. If you need to sacrifice him more times, you can grab Rain of Filth to get enough mana to cast him a few times. Tevesh Szat's 0/1s are excellent for sacrificing as well. If you're running low on life, you can grab Grey Merchant. Your devotion to black should be at least 5, counting just Gary and Rograkh, which will get you between 5 and 15 life depending on the number of opponents you're facing. You can also grab Aetherflux if your storm count is high and you can cast a spell after playing it. Let's go over the cards that I run in the deck. Tutors are some of the most powerful and important cards in the EDH deck. Since we're running black, we have access to the most powerful tutors in the game. We want tutors that can put Rograkh in the graveyard. We also want tutors that can get reanimate effects to get Rograkh out of the graveyard. Entomb and Buried Alive are some of the best ways to get Rograkh into the graveyard. Entomb is incredibly cost efficient at 1 mana. It can also grab non-creature spells, so you can get Dread Return if you're in need of a reanimation effect. Buried Alive is powerful since it can put Rograkh, Triskelion, and Mikaeus into the graveyard all at once. You can cast Buried Alive putting those 3 into the graveyard, reanimate Rograkh, and then tutor up Victimize using Rograkh and win the game. Demonic Tutor, Grim Tutor, Imperial Seal, and Vampiric Tutor are all CDH staples that go into every deck running black. Thanks Wizards for finally reprinting Grim Tutor, making CDH decks a couple $100 cheaper. Now they just need to reprint Imperial Seal and we'll all be set. The commanders provide plenty of sacrifice fodder for Diabolic Intent, so it's a no-brainer putting it in this deck. The deck should be drawing a lot of cards, so the chances of discarding a card you don't want to discard to gamble is mitigated, since having a lot of cards in your hand lowers the chances of that happening. An added benefit is if you discard a card you want to reanimate, like Rograkh, the discard can actually be beneficial. Tevesh Szat can draw you cards, so you should be able to get to the cards you tutored for using Scheming Symmetry before your opponent can get to theirs. And this card is downright busted when paired with Opposition Agent. Praetor's Grasp searches your opponent's library for a card. You should probably grab a mana rock, or you can grab a combo piece if you're trying to prevent them from winning. Card draw is essential for any commander deck, especially in CDH where having access to many options to maximize your turns is an important part of victory. Tevesh Szat's +1 is going to draw you cards more often than anything else in the deck. I can't overstate how powerful having consistent card draw in the command zone is. Just look how Tymna and Thrasios have taken over the format for years now, mostly because they are efficient and consistent card draw. Dark Deal, Wheel of Fortune, and Wheel of Misfortune are all wheel effects, which is great for drawing cards, and it can be great at getting Rograkh into the graveyard. Don't underestimate wheels. Getting to see potentially 7 new cards can often win you the game on the spot, thanks to all the free mana and tutors available in EDH. Faithless Looting is already an incredibly efficient looter, but it's also a great way to get cards that you want in the graveyard out of your hand. Night's Whisper is an efficient card draw spell in black. Dark Confidant is a staple for EDH. It gets you an extra card on each of your turns for a small price of life, and all for just 2 mana. Sensei's Divining Top isn't technically card draw, but it's incredibly efficient card selection, which will probably be just as good as drawing cards as it helps you get the right card at the right time. You can equip Skull Clamp to either the 0-1s that Tevesh Szat makes, or Rograkh to draw some cards, all at an incredibly efficient rate of 1 mana. Ad Nauseam is basically a 1-card combo if you have enough life. The deck runs Aether Flux, so there's a decent chance of you being able to storm off and kill your opponents after you've untapped with all those cards in your hand. Necropotence is a bit of a nombo with the discard we run in the deck, but the sheer power of this card more than makes up for that small drawback. This deck is heavily black, so the 3 black mana cost shouldn't be much of a problem. Being able to get your deck working as quickly as possible is essential in EDH. You need to be making relevant plays turns 1 and 2, or you're going to quickly fall behind the other players. Ramp allows you to get in the game fast, and it's incredibly important to run a lot of it in your deck. Dockside Extortionist can end up netting you a ton of mana for just a 2-drop. Artifacts, especially mana rocks, are all over the place in EDH, so you should be getting a decent chunk of treasures when he enters play. It's also nice to have a body to use as sacrifice fodder, or as a good creature you can reanimate if he's in the graveyard. Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Rakdos Signet, and Talisman of Indulgence are all solid 2 CMC mana rocks that will help get your deck working faster. Thought Vessel doesn't tap for colored mana, but it does provide an incredibly useful effect for this deck, since this deck can easily draw a ton of cards with Ad Nauseam or Necropotence. Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar turn those 0-1s into mana, which is obviously incredibly helpful. They also work as infinite sacrifice outlets for the Mikaeus and Walking Ballista combo. Chrome Mox, Mana Crypt, Mox Diamond, and Soul Ring are all EDH staples that go in every deck. They're often what enable those turn 1 and 2 wins. Helm of Awakening is great for combo decks that aren't too concerned about interacting with your opponents, since it enables you to combo off much quicker. It does say all players, so this card can backfire if you aren't careful. Stacks effects can be a pain to fight against when you're trying to combo off, and Helm is great at fighting the mana taxing stacks effects. You want Tevesh Szat out to make 0-1s draw cards and tick towards his ultimate as soon as possible, and Jewel Lotus really helps to make that happen incredibly fast. The deck draws a lot of cards, so running Lotus Petal really doesn't hurt much since the card disadvantage it brings is mitigated. Mana Vault can help to pay for the high mana cost of Tevesh Szat. Rograkh is the best commander to play Mox Amber with, basically turning it into a Mox Ruby. Burnt Offering is used to sacrifice Rograkh at the end of the Rograkh combo if you need the mana to play the spells you tutored. Cabal Ritual and Dark Ritual are great ritual effects that should be played in any EDH deck that uses a decent amount of black. The deck provides a lot of sacrifice fodder for Culling the Weak, making it a solid card to run in the deck. Reign of Filth can get you a lot of mana later on in the game when you have a bunch of swamps laying around, and will help tremendously in getting enough mana to close out the game. The deck needs to be able to cheat Rograkh into play using reanimation effects, so which ones do we run in the deck? Dread Return is clunky at 4 mana, but it's really supposed to be casted using Flashback. 3 creatures are pretty easy to get in this deck. +2 Tevesh Szat and cast Rograkh. There, you have 3 creatures to sacrifice. Reanimate is incredibly mana efficient at just 1 black. Losing 8 life from reanimating Rograkh is going to hurt a bit, but that's why we run life gain in the deck. Victimize is used to get Mikaeus and Triskelion onto the battlefield to combo off. Yawgmoth's Will isn't used to cheat Razaketh into play, but it's instead used to reuse cards in your graveyard, which can be incredibly powerful, especially later on in the game. Underworld Breach works a lot like Yawgmoth's Will with a few small changes. First, you have to exile 3 other cards as part of the escape cost. Second, the cards that go in the graveyard this turn don't get exiled, so you can reuse the same card multiple times as long as you can pay for its escape cost. And third, it costs 1 less mana, which is nice. Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, and Necromancy are all solid reanimation effects that are good at getting Razaketh out of the graveyard. This deck is much more interested in comboing off rather than controlling the board. However, this definitely isn't the fastest combo deck out there. We need to run some removal to disrupt our opponents to slow them down, to give us enough time to assemble our game plan. Bifrost and Vandal Blast are solid one-sided artifact destruction spells. Innocent Blood is used to kill off early game mana dorks. This card doesn't hurt us much since we have a lot of sacrifice fodder laying around. Toxic Deluge has become the default board wiping commander. It gets around indestructible and is efficiently costed at only 3 mana. This is finally a deck where Cabal Therapists can truly shine. This card is incredibly efficiently costed at only 1 mana, and there should be plenty of thralls laying around to sacrifice to this guy. If you don't know a card that's in an opponent's hand, a good guess would be one of the combo pieces that they're running. Or if it's a blue deck, you can name one of the free counter spells like Force of Will or Force of Negation. Even if you don't hit a card, getting information of what's in an opponent's hand is incredibly valuable and can let you know whether it's safe to combo out that turn. Opposition Agent is a great tutor steal and one-sided stacks piece. Even just taking an opponent's land off a fetch land is incredibly powerful, but this card has a much higher power ceiling than that. For instance, stealing a demonic tutor is obviously incredibly powerful, but just being a one-sided stacks piece that doesn't allow your opponents to search their libraries at only 3 mana is amazing for a format that heavily relies on tutors. Deadly Rollick is an incredibly efficient removal spell, since you can't really get much more efficient than 0 mana. In theory, the deck should constantly have Tevesh Szat on the battlefield, or you can have Rograkh on the field in a pinch if you need to be able to cast this card. The deck doesn't run much control spells since we are just trying to combo off as quickly as possible, but a 0 cost and removal spell isn't going to slow down our game plan, so it's well worth running in the deck. Fire Covenant is basically a one-sided Toxic Deluge. It's also efficiently costed at only 3 mana, and as an additional benefit, it's an instant. Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast are some of the few efficient options the other colors have as a way of dealing with Blue's overpowered spells, mainly counter spells. Blue is all over the place in EDH, which also means counter spells are everywhere. They're especially useful for protecting you from counter spells when you're comboing off. We're a 2-color deck, so Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon shouldn't hit us as hard as our opponents. These cards have the potential to shut down decks with greedy mana bases, especially 4 and 5 color decks. The deck is much more reliant on black mana than red, however I went out of my way to run a lot of basic swamps, so the deck can still run well with one of these effects on board. Speaking of lands, that brings me to my next section. The deck is a 2-color deck, so the mana base isn't particularly complicated. Ancient Tomb is a solid land for any deck that isn't really color heavy. The 2 damage isn't a big deal in Commander, and is well worth it for getting you an extra mana. Badlands and Blood Crypt are dual lands that are fetchable since they have both land types. I only run Bloodstained Mire and not the off-color fetch lands for a couple reasons. First, the life payment matters in this deck, since Razaketh requires life and many of the black cards require life payment like Necropotence, Toxic Deluge, and Ad Nauseam. Second, fetch lands have gotten much worse with the printing of Opposition Agent. Combined with Aven Mind Sensor and Stranglehold, being able to crack a fetch has now become much less of a guarantee. City of Brass and Mana Confluence go in every multicolored deck, and it's no different in EDH. With Commander Legends, you can now get your command towers foil at a reasonable price. Finally. Also run this card, this is Commander. Luxury Suite is basically an untapped dual land 99% of the time. Phyrexian Tower is great for this deck since we can feed Thralls into it. Prismatic Vista is an auto-include in any multicolor deck running a decent amount of basics. Sulphurous Springs is a slightly better City of Brass or Mana Confluence since you could tap it for colorless. Tainted Peak should be solid since we run a lot of swamps in the deck. However, I'm not entirely sure if it's CDH viable. I'll definitely have to do some testing. If you don't want to run this card, just use a basic swamp instead. Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth goes in every deck running black. It helps make your deck a little more consistent with almost no cost, the only cost being that it's a non-basic. 2 mountains and 15 swamps fill up the rest of the land base. The deck is heavily black, so there should be no mountains in the deck if you go off the ratio of red and black in the deck. However, it's a good idea to have at least 2 mountains for your fetch lands and to give you access to a decent amount of red if you're under a non-basic land hate effect like Back to Basics. In my CDH deck videos, I like to go over opening hands, since it can give you a little preview of the thought process of piloting the deck and how quickly the deck can combo off. Deciding whether or not to mulligan can be the most difficult and most important decision you make in a game. It happens right away in the game, so it can be a little overwhelming sometimes, especially when using a new deck in CDH. This little thought experiment should help you make the right call when deciding your opening hand. I drew all these up randomly. Last 2 are god hands that I customized that will let you combo off turn 1. First hand. Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, Mountain, 2 Swamps, Mox Diamond, Animate Dead, and Aetherflux Reservoir. This hand is interesting. It ramps with Mox Diamond, which is the main card saving it from being a trash hand. It has Animate Dead, which might allow us to win out of nowhere if we can get Razaketh in the graveyard with a card like Entomb. The Aetherflux is kind of a dead card, but might be useful later if we can draw a storm card like Ad Nauseam or Necropotence, but I'd rather it be a tutor or mana ramp. 4 lands is a little too much. I'd prefer if one of the swamps was a mana rock. This hand is going to be either good or fall apart, depending on what we draw in the next couple turns. We really need to get Tevesh Szat out faster than turn 4, so drawing some ramp would be really solid. If we keep drawing lands or awkward cards, this hand will fall apart and we'll probably lose the game. Overall, I'd give this hand a 3 out of 5. Second hand. Command Tower, Badlands, Soul Ring, Burnt Offering, Gamble, Thought Vessel, and Wheel of Misfortune. Wow, this hand is impressive. Turn 1 you could go Land, Soul Ring, Thought Vessel, and get a turn 2 Tevesh Szat, which is exactly where you want to be. Gamble and Wheel of Misfortune are amazing and will keep the deck going, even if Tevesh Szat gets answered turn 2. Burnt Offering is a dead card, but the hand really doesn't care. 5 out of 5, a fast and resilient opening hand. Third hand. Blood Crypt, Soul Ring, Vampiric Tutor, Faithless Looting, Talisman of Indulgence, Night's Whisper, and Ashnod's Altar. Another amazing hand. Turn 1 you can go Soul Ring, Talisman, and then you can cast Vampiric Tutor to set yourself up for next turn, or you can cast Faithless Looting. There are so many options for your next turn. I'm not even sure what the best course of action is. I guess it depends on what you tutored for. 5 out of 5, what a powerhouse of an opening hand. Fourth hand. Ancient Tomb, Swamp, Mountain, Bloodstained Mire, Innocent Blood, Opposition Agent, and Dread Return. Ancient Tomb helps a lot to keep this hand from being complete garbage. If you're playing against a lot of green decks that are likely to play turn 1 mana dorks, then Innocent Blood might be able to hit them hard enough that they'll be brought down to your mediocre level. You also might be able to get a solid hit with Opposition Agent that will help you out of this mediocre hand. Dread Return is a dead card at the moment. 2 out of 5. I'd keep this if you think Innocent Blood will do some work. Other than that, a turn 4 Tevesh Szat isn't very exciting. It's definitely mediocre, but a playable hand. 5th hand, God Hand. Swamp, Mox Amber, Dark Ritual, Faithless Looting, Victimize, Mikaeus, and Triskelion. This is a turn 1 win. This one takes full advantage of Rograkh. First, cast Rograkh, then cast Mox Amber, which can tap for red. Use the red to cast Faithless Looting, discard Mikaeus and Triskelion. Play your Swamp, tap it for black, and use it to cast Dark Ritual. Use the 3 black to cast Victimize, sacrificing Rograkh. Bring Mikaeus and Triskelion on the battlefield and win turn 1. 6th hand, another God Hand. Anything that can get Rograkh out turn 1 will probably win you the game as long as you can get 1 tutor off by sacrificing Rograkh. Swamp, Dark Ritual, Mana Crypt, Buried Alive, Burnt Offering, and Reanimate. First, play your land, tap it for black, and cast Dark Ritual. Play Mana Crypt, tap it, and use the 2 colorless and 1 black to cast Buried Alive, putting Rograkh, Mikaeus, and Triskelion in your graveyard. Cast Reanimate, getting Rograkh. Cast Rograkh and sacrifice him to Rograkh to get Victimize. Cast Burnt Offering, sacrificing Rograkh, getting 8 mana. Cast Rograkh and sacrifice him to Victimize to get Mikaeus and Triskelion onto the battlefield. And there you go, there's another turn 1 win, and with only 6 cards in hand. I want to thank you for watching my deck tech on Tevesh Szat, Doom of Fools, and Rograkh, son of Rograkh. I'd appreciate it if you lightly caress that like button, and then once you've gained its trust, you must smash it, and then you can comment, and most importantly, you can subscribe. And again, thank you for watching.